Hey everyone, this is Disc Junkie and welcome back to Stories of Addiction. Episode 2. It's been like over a year since we first, I mean me, when I first did episode 1. And I want to mention just before we begin that the audio quality on episode 1 was much better than it is here, directly resulting from the fact that the first episode was recorded with sort of high professional, top quality microphones, whereas this second episode is recorded on an iPhone. First time I did this, and I didn't really realize that as this became quite a long episode, I sort of ended up moving the phone a bit, and I just didn't realize while I was recording how much of an effect moving the phone actually had. So therefore the sound sort of degraded over a longer period of time. But I have tried to sort of make the audio quality better in post-production, but just, be aware that there can be some very sudden change in audio quality. And the audio quality does improve the longer you get into the podcast. It's mainly in the beginning, sort of first half of the podcast, which granted it's a very long time, but even so. Also, there are a couple of things I just want to mention really quickly about episode 1. A couple of phrases which have sort of bothered me ever since I said them and every time I listen back to that episode. The first thing is that I mentioned something where I say that I will basically buy anything for my collection as long as it's cool, and makes it sound like I will buy anything as long as other people think it's cool, which is essentially the exact opposite of what I actually meant. The thing I meant is that I will buy anything for my collection as long as I think it's cool, which is to say that, I don't really care about the fact that most people probably wouldn't collect movies in the sense that I do, and that's all sort of the whole point of, why I'm bringing that up. There's also another thing which I'm not sure if people even notice, but I talk about how sometimes you don't choose a movie, but a movie chooses you, or an edition chooses you. And then I go into this weird monologue and sort of lose trail of what I'm actually trying to say by that. And quite frankly, now I don't remember. I think it's paraphrased from something else. Thought I had this clever idea of what I was trying to say, and then I forgot about it. So enough chit-chat. Sorry that the intro became so long as well. And yeah, let's just go ahead and roll out episode 2, which is entitled The Massacre That Changed My Life. I got stories of addiction. Yeah, I got stories of addiction.
I don't know what I'm saying. Stop filming me!
So the year is 1974. Oh, jeez. I know that in the first episode I was all sort of mysterious and sort of trying to work my way up to sort of talking about what the actual episode was gonna be about, which I'm not gonna do now. I'm just gonna bluntly tell you this episode is all about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper. Actually, it's Toby Hooper. I can never pronounce it correctly, and no one else can either, unless you've sort of read it and for some reason you know that that's what it is. And I'm just gonna tell you sort of how this film has changed my life, because it really has. And I think that, in order to do so, I guess the best way to do it is to just go back to the beginning. And the beginning for me when it comes to Texas Chainsaw is actually quite a bit of way into the future if you compare to when the film was first made available, so to speak. And I think we're actually gonna go back as far as we can and just try to do this somewhat chronologically, just to sort of set the tone and get the feel. Let's just pretend, okay, it's October 1st, it's 1974, you're in America, what do? Well, hopefully you're going to the first ever screening of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know if there were pre-screenings, but yeah, this is the date when the film was essentially first shown in cinemas in America. The story for me doesn't start here, because I wasn't actually born in 1974. I was born in 1981, bit of a throwback to the first episode of this podcast. I live in Sweden, and the film actually has quite a unusual and troubled history in Sweden. So I think it's only fair that we actually go through the Swedish history up until the point where the film actually finds me, so to speak. And about 6 years later, on December 2nd, 1980, that is a very essential date for this film's history in Sweden. And the reason for that is a little TV program called Studio S. And Studio S was essentially a television debate program. You know, one of these shows which was filmed in front of a live studio audience. And it was a very sort of, you know, serious TV show. It was made by Swedish television, like the national TV channel, so to speak. And the segment on this particular day was something called Who Needs Video? You know, this was back in 1980, so the VHS format was just getting started. You know, there was a lot of talk about so-called video violence, putting a name to the horrificness that was violence on film, essentially, but maybe more specifically violence on video. And it was sort of believed that kids were renting videotapes, and it was sort of a format that would make violence on film much more accessible to, you know, the young people of the time. So this was sort of like the main focus of this television studio debate. And so this program premiered in the evening. It was at 9:30. You know, they said beforehand, there was sort of like a press release from the TV network that, you know, we're going to show some segments from some really violent films during the program as part of the debate. So really went out of their way to tell everyone, you know, that, you know, there's going to be some pretty graphic stuff, and we want kids to go to bed. So that at the same time, you know, everyone who was sort of into horror films was all like, okay, you know, gotta see this thing, see what movies they mentioned. So it became like, you know, it's sort of like this hype around the program even before it aired. And throughout the program, they show like these violent clips from various movies, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Toolbox Murders and Eaten Alive, and all of these sort of classic violent horror movies. And after the first violent segment was shown in the program, there was actually such a whirlwind of angry phone calls coming into the switchboard of Swedish television that their switchboard essentially collapsed. That's how big of a frenzy the Swedish people, you know, went into when they started showing these things. And I mean, this TV debate, it's such a weird show. They have like, people are coming in there and they're quoting the Bible, like saying, you know, this video rental stores are essentially like, you know, doing the devil's work. Like, you know, they are basically spreading this plague of violent films. You know, this will cause kids to, you know, become serial killers, and, you know, it's such a bizarre idea, and it was very sort of popular opinion at the time. Personally, just putting this in here, I don't think that, you know, young people should be watching violent films. I mean, it's up to the parents to see whether they do or not. That's just, you know, it's called parenting, and, you know, I don't think you should sort of stop violent films, but that's basically what they were trying to do. There was even talk about, like, you know, banning the video format because essentially, you know, the progress of this new TV and video technology will create another place where violent films can be viewed, and we don't want violent films to be viewed, so let's stop the format. But luckily, they didn't stop the format. But what did happen is that, you know, they did show clips from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it actually had such an extreme impact that it actually led to the film being banned in Sweden. And I think that, you know, one of the things which was, you know, a really hard hit in terms of this whole program was, it was a small segment where they basically went to a local schoolyard for like young kids, I don't know, like maybe 10 years old or something, and they're having a TV interview with these kids, and they asked them, like, have you seen any violent films? And essentially asked them, like, have you seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And these kids start like, yeah, I've seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and this interviewer is like, okay, can you tell me something about it? And they go into these ridiculous descriptions where they're sort of like, yeah, they hung this girl on the meat hook and sawed her in half, and I saw it, and it was super cool, and it's like this really bizarre thing. Several years later, it was actually discovered that that particular segment was a hoax. It was actually, these kids hadn't seen the violent films they're saying that they've seen. They were actually told before the camera started rolling by the broadcast team that, okay, we're going to film you, and it's going to be like this thing where we ask you if you have seen these violent films, and we want you to say that you have. And they were even told, like, and this is what the movie's about, and this is what we want you to say. And basically paid them by, you're going to get free hamburgers at McDonald's or whatever. And so basically, by the time the program was over, you had these concerned parents in the audience, in the live studio audience, who were sort of pleading with politicians, because there were actually politicians invited to this debate. So you actually had politicians sitting face to face with concerned parents, and sitting face to face with like the head of these rental stores. And so they're sitting there pleading with politicians. They are essentially the people in this debate. So obviously the politicians are sitting there going like, okay, well, everybody's pretty angry about this video violence thing. What are you gonna do about the video violence? Think of the children! And it's such a bizarre farce. And when you look at this broadcast today, it's so scary in a sense. And I mean, you laugh about it because it is laughable. But knowing the effect that this had, and the events that are about to unfold in this story, it's like the scariest thing, and a true milestone in the annals of Swedish television history. So what happens is that on December 30th in 1980, there's basically a suggestion for a temporary law which they are going to enforce, which means that it will become punishable to share or distribute realistic depictions of extreme violence on video to anyone under 15 years old. And that's essentially what the law was about. And there's also a second suggested law which will be the same for adults. So there was basically like two suggested laws, one for people under 15 and one for adults. And so flash forward to Tuesday on June 9th 1981. It is decided by the Swedish parliament. Yeah, we have a parliament in Sweden, by the way. It's a democracy, and we have a parliament. We also have a Swedish king, which I don't know. I'm not gonna get into the whole sort of political establishment in Sweden. But anyway, so like the highest you can go, the Swedish parliament decides on this day that they are in fact gonna enforce the first law, which has been up for review, which says that it will become punishable legally to share and distribute violent films to kids under 15. And this law is going to go into effect on July 1st, on the very same year, 1981. And so there's like this censorship bureau of the state, which is basically gonna review and certify whether a film is, violent enough that it should be, illegal to distribute it, or if it's gonna be okay. And this bureau also has, the power to sort of cut movies and censor them and release them like in a legal form where it's been censored and cut down. So it's basically like the whole thing with like the pre-cert and the pre-cert act in the UK roughly around the same time, or around the 84 or whatever it is. And so with all this going on, like, laws being passed, and there's all this talk about video violence, there's basically a really high demand that, like the the police and the legal establishment do something about this. There's actually police raids. They actually raid video rental stores and they seize like 50 movies. And so on Wednesday, the 26th of January 1983, did I say that correctly? January? I don't know, it's hard. The first ever video trial, so to speak, here in Scandinavia. And among the films that, you know, have sort of been prosecuted or being prosecuted, I don't know how you would say it, is the Toolbox Murders, really classic horror films. And so there are trials like this throughout the country, and it's just a really bizarre time. And so flash forward to Wednesday, June 13th, 1984. Because this is a very important date. This is the date when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is first submitted to the, you know, Cinematic Reviewing Board, whatever, the censorship place, I forget what it's called. And it was submitted by a company called Succea Film, and you know, they handed in for review, and it's banned. The Cinematic Bureau of the state completely bans the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in Sweden, June 13th, 1984. And this is, it's very bizarre. It basically becomes completely illegal. You can't rent it, you can't, it's not allowed to be shown. It's, you know, a film being banned, it's such a bizarre thing today. But back then, these things happened. It's just completely bizarre thing. But anyway, when we get to 1986, something really strange happens. There's a new law that's passed, which essentially makes the distributors held accountable. They can basically release any movie they want, but, you know, they are also legally responsible for not distributing violent films to kids. So, yeah, basically, you know, they place the responsibility with the distributors, which is a very interesting thing, and it's also going to get a very strange effect. On Tuesday, September 16th, there's this guy called Anders Andarve. It's a great guy. I've actually chatted with him. I actually have him among my friends on Facebook, which is kind of bizarre. At the time, he held the rights to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in Sweden. And so he actually distributes the film on rental VHS. And this was the only way you could view it at the time, yes. And this was an actual Swedish release. And in order to try out this new law that's enforced, he actually goes to the very strange length of turning himself into the police. It's such a bizarre story, and they actually convict him, and he is convicted to pay 50 daily fines, for this crime of his. And from what I hear, rumor-wise, he essentially paid these fines from all the money he'd made from owning the rights to Texas Chainsaw and basically renting it out to people. And so this, the rental release was very quickly pulled from shelves and was basically a deleted title. I actually own a copy of this, which is, pretty bizarre, and you can find them, but they are very, very uncommon. And so the next point in our story is in 1994, because in 1994, the Bureau of Film Censorship, whatever, they actually passed the film. It's resubmitted for review, so to speak, and they actually pass it. There are some minor cuts to it. It can also be mentioned, by the way, that the rental version from Anders Andarve, that was actually also cut. It wasn't cut in the usual way where you will trim away part of the violent scenes. Those were actually left intact, but Anders felt that the classic dinner scene was, a bit too much, so he basically cut that down with quite a few seconds. But so the film hadn't actually been released uncut at all in Sweden. And then came 1994, and the Film Censorship Board actually passed it. But they cut 2 sequences from the film, which amount to roughly 50 seconds. And so it's released on VHS shortly thereafter. I think it's around 95. And it's Atlantic Film that first distributed the film on VHS. So between 1986 and 1994, there are no Swedish releases of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then in 1994, when it comes out, it's actually not uncensored, it's actually cut down. And so after this, we're going to flash forward to 2001. 21 years after the Studio S program was first shown on TV, and 17 years after the film was completely banned. On this date, Wednesday, June 6th, in 2001, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is released, entirely uncut. But can you imagine, between 1974 and 2001, there's not been a single uncut release of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on any format in Sweden. This is just, it boggles the mind. And, you know, this is roughly around the time when I first came into contact with this movie. You know, they were going from video to DVD, and this is sort of a weird thing to say, but, you know, at the time, I was basically in my late teens, I guess, and I remember I actually was hanging out and buying like DVDs, like my first DVDs, and I wasn't shoplifting. I don't consider it shoplifting, but I remember that I actually went into like these low price like supermarkets, whatever, that also sold the DVDs, like, you know, like the bargain bin titles. And I would actually go to the bargain bin, and I would actually take like these bargain bin stickers, which had like the really low price on them, and which I actually peel them off and move them and put them on much more expensive films, so I would essentially have the money to buy them. And I never got caught doing this, but, you know, it didn't take long before I decided to, like, you know, stop doing it, because it was, I don't know, it was just a ridiculous risk to take. But anyway, while I was browsing DVDs at the time, I remember very specifically that I actually came into contact with the film. So this was in 2001. This was the first time I ever came into contact with this film, and it was this DVD released by Scanbox. This was the first ever uncut version, it actually says on the cover, finally released by the Board of Censorship without any cuts to it. But this is not the first time I actually watched the film. I just saw it on the shelf and thought to myself, I don't know, I don't really like horror movies. Because, you know, I was never into horror movies at a young age, which is really weird, I guess. Or, you know, it might surprise you that I didn't see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at an early age, and that sort of, you know, struck a chord with me or whatever, but it didn't, because I never watched it. I never watched any horror movies. I didn't find them interesting, and I think one of the main reasons for that is actually because of my father, who worked in television at the time. He actually worked at Swedish television, like the national, you know, broadcasting channel, and so he was sort of like my, you know, guy on the inside or whatever. You know, I adored my father, and I don't know if I actually remember this or if it's something that's been told to me and I sort of think that I remembered it, but he had this phrase which he would always use when it came to, like, if there was ever something violent or TV and I saw something on TV which I thought was scary or whatever, he would always tell me, like, you know, you don't have to worry about it, Oscar, because, you know what, it's just ketchup. And it's so weird, because it's always stuck with me and sort of been like the thing, like, it's not actually blood, it's just ketchup, it's not real, it's fictitious. And I think the fact that he sort of explained this to me at such a young age, I think that's part of the reason why I didn't have any particular interest in horror movies. I didn't get the appeal. That's also part, you know, the reason why I didn't purchase the DVD back in 2001 when I first discovered it. And so if we're gonna, you know, I guess we can flash forward now to the first time when I actually watched the movie. Yeah, finally something happens in this podcast. It's been very hard for me to determine any kind of exact date on this, but I do know that the release which I watched was first distributed in 2008, and it was a really fancy looking steelbook, Swedish steelbook release, and it's actually available in the whole of Scandinavia, so like Finland, Denmark, Norway, was by Atlantic Film, and it's a beautiful steelbook. It was a very well-made special edition. It has a ton of documentary, and it's just, even today, by this standard, it's for a DVD, it's a very, very well-packed. So you might be wondering, like, okay, so why did I basically decide to finally watch this? Well, you know, I was clicking around, and, you know, I was starting to get into DVD collecting, and I saw this thing, and it was marketed down. I think it was down to like 99 Swedish crowns, which really isn't a lot for a steelbook. And, you know, it's always, you know, obviously it's branded like, you know, like the mother of all horror films, or whatever you call it. And so I just felt like it's a very nice steelbook, and I like steelbooks, so yeah, I'm just gonna buy the steelbook, gonna watch the movie, and see what the hell the fuss is about. So I ordered the film, it's delivered to my doorstep. I think this was just, you know, like daytime or whatever. I don't think I watched it that late at night or something. But so I popped this DVD in, and I have a very preconceived notion of what it is I'm about to see. And I believe that the film I'm about to see is gonna be just like this crappy 70s movie. It's gonna be very, very gory. There's gonna be blood everywhere. I'm basically expecting to see something like a Monty Python sketch. You know, there's gonna be so much gore that it's gonna be ridiculous. And there's gonna be a bunch of chainsaws, people, you know, hanging on hooks. And, you know, there's gonna be so much blood, and it's gonna look terrible because the effects are just gonna be awful. But yeah, I'm thinking, you know, it's a cult film, and it's a violent film, but it's a cult film for a reason. But not necessarily a good one. So I pop the movie in, and I start watching this thing. And even from the start, you know, watching it, and I'm thinking like, well, you know, this is actually looks pretty good. I don't know what they're building up to, but it's, you know, I was sort of expecting that things were gonna go crazy a bit earlier. I'm just thinking they're like, okay, well, not really sure what's going on, but there's not much happening. Just for the record, if you haven't seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for whatever reason, just pause this podcast now, go watch this movie, and then come back, and you can listen to the rest of the podcast. Because, you know, I don't mean to have any sort of spoilers in here, but there might be some spoilers. But I don't think so. I guess I'll do like a spoiler alert if something comes up. But anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm watching the movie, and we're coming up to like the first kill scene. I'm not gonna mention which one this is. And all of a sudden, the kill happens. And it's also the first time we get to see the villain in this film, who's Leatherface, obviously. What's interesting about this scene is that it happens so quickly, and the film itself has no theatrical score in the classic sense. There's no sort of typical musical score throughout the film. It's sort of like this weird experimental thing where it's basically just sounds and weird instruments, which it's not like conventional music in that it's not like, you know, da, 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 no crescendo or you know, anything like that. It's just various sort of weird noises which sort of comprise this strange audio background, whatever. But I just want to mention this because I think this is part of why this film is so powerful, is because of that very strange audio background. Because you don't have, like in modern horror films today, it's very easy to have these sort of jump scares, and you can sort of watch modern film today and you can sort of hear, based on the audio in the background, like the scoring, like, okay, something's mysterious now, or, you know, we're coming up to something violent happening. But in this film you can't do that. Yes, there are jump scares, and they do play with like audio in the background for when something violent happens, but the whole sort of pre-notion that, okay, I can listen to the music and I can sort of feel like, okay, this is an exciting scene, something's about to go bad. And so when this first kill happens, it's like I'm just on the edge of my seat. It's like I'm almost jumping out of my seat in the couch, because it's like, what the fuck just happened? It's such an immensely powerful scene, and it goes by so quickly. It's almost like ripping a band-aid off. You're or getting punched in the face by someone. It's just you really don't expect it. And from that moment on, when that scene came, and I was just hooked, and I'm on the edge of my seat for like the rest of the film. Yeah, I remember that the movie Aliens was basically described as Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space. To sort of say that, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a very intense film. You're always sort of very high on adrenaline. So you're always sort of like trying to catch your breath, in a sense. But at the same time, the film has such classic and haunting visuals. These small things, like these close-ups of the moon, or like this close-up of this spider's nest. Now, obviously, I don't think that Tobe Hooper had any idea just how much of a classic this film would become, but you can definitely tell that, you know, they were really setting out to do something different. And from that first kill, I was just hooked, no pun intended. And so I'm watching this thing from beginning to end, and once the film is over, you know, it's gonna sound ridiculous no matter how I say it, but this film changed the way I view movies, in a sense. Because up until this point, I had basically had zero interest. Up until 2008 or 2010 or whatever this was, when I first saw this film, I had no interest in horror movies. And this is very important, because when I saw this, I suddenly realized, like, okay, this is why people like horror movies. You know, up until then, I didn't understand that. I can never sort of understand why would you want to watch a horror movie. You know, it's just ketchup, and it's just violent, and, you know, it's hard to look at, and it's like, why would anybody want to be scared or grossed out by practical, you know, and gory effects? But then when I watched this, and I saw the effect of how you can sort of scare an audience, and how you can sort of keep an audience on their seat by basically showing nothing, because that's also the thing. If you haven't seen this film, I can just explain to you that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is probably the least bloody film you will ever see. I mean, in terms of horror films, and you're gonna be like, yeah, right, that's just bullshit. But it's not. And that's the thing which makes this whole story of the film being banned and this whole video violence situation so horrifying. Because before you have actually watched the movie, you really shouldn't have an opinion on it. Because these angry parents, which were so concerned about their kids' well-being, I doubt most of them had actually seen this film. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, one of the greatest titles ever, I gotta say, it is also an Achilles heel, because you get such a preconceived notion of what this movie is gonna be like. I mean, I had it. I didn't know the first thing about this movie until I first picked it up on DVD and just watched it, not out of spite, but just watched it because I wanted to know what the hell the fuss was about. Like, you know, why is this film such a hit? And also, why would people collect it? Because that's just the thing. I saw people on the DVD collecting scene. You know, I was collecting movies, and one of the films which I always saw other collectors talk about and post pictures of, like, oh, I got this new limited edition of Texas Chainsaw, and oh, I got this other special collector's edition from Germany, and oh, here's a third one. I remember this was one of those films which people kept double dipping on and purchasing again and again and again. And it was just bizarre. And it's one of the most common questions that I get is probably, how many times have you watched this movie? And I'm going to give everyone who's listening to this podcast just a few minutes to think of an answer. So let's just say that you're asking me this question, like, you know, okay, so how many times have I watched this movie? What do you think the answer is going to be? I can tell you beforehand that I have now accumulated a little bit over 260 different unique versions of this film, ranging from VHS to DVD, Blu-ray, 8mm film, you know, I basically own every format it's ever been released on. So, you know, I'll pose the question again. How many times do you think I have watched this movie? Okay. I would say that I probably watched this movie, about 5-6 times. No, not 500-600 times. Just 5-6 times. Not 56, just 5-6. Because I'm not really sure. And that's usually, people usually go like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, just 5 times. They're like, but you love this film. You own like 200 versions of it. And I'm like, yeah. And everyone's like, I really expected it to be like, you watch this every day. I'm like, no. And there's also a reason for that. And that's basically because, to me, this film is not something that you just pop on and watch out of boredom. I know, like back in the day when I was, you know, first getting into films and watching movies like Aliens or whatever, I know that at that time, you know, was young, I don't know, but then I remember that you would watch films over and over again because it was just, it was such a rush watching cool movies, especially like, you know, action films and such, where, you know, a lot of cool scenes and things happen. But when it comes to horror movies and when it comes to Texas Chainsaw, it's just not the same thing. I mean, I do watch movies repeatedly, and there's a lot of films which, you know, I just love, and I can always sort of, you know, put a movie on which I've watched before, like David Fincher's Seven, or David Fincher's Zodiac, or some of these really classic, just fantastic movies. A lot of them are films which I can just never get enough of. Like whatever night it is, I can just feel like, yeah, okay, let's just watch Seven, because it's such a beautiful film, and you can sort of, doesn't matter which mood I'm in, I can just, you know, sit down and totally immerse myself into this experience. But I can't do that with Texas Chainsaw, and I think the reason is that Texas Chainsaw is such a powerful and adrenaline-driven film that it's like the whole experience of watching this movie is just very intense, and I don't think it's something that you would do on an everyday basis. Or I mean, at least I don't particularly enjoy watching a film like this without being like totally focused about it. I've never watched this film sort of half-heartedly, so to speak. But yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with like the tone and like how powerful of an experience it is. I'm not saying that movies like Seven or whatever aren't powerful. I'm just saying that this is a film which has such a strong effect on one's psyche. Not that, you know, it's, you know, okay, it's too violent and I can't handle it, but it just has this power to it, where you really have to sort of, you really have to watch it, and it sort of gets under your skin, and it's just unnerving and very sort of effective in that way. And I think that's probably the reason why I don't like to watch it too much, because I think it's too much of a powerful film, and it's, to me, it's more of like a ritualistic thing, where, you know, I don't want to watch it like, you know, several times a week or whatever. I basically watch it like maybe once every, you know, like, I usually watch it like, I don't know, maybe like, you know, once a year, once every other year or whatever. Usually I tend to watch it because I watch it with someone else who hasn't seen it. That's usually the reason. But anyway, so at this point, after watching the film, it really had a big effect on me. And so from that moment on, this film became like my my main film. It became like this thing which I finally realized why everyone kept purchasing this. Like everyone else, all these collectors around me were so extremely into it and watched it and collected it with such devotion. I finally understood why that was. And so I also started purchasing this like from all around the world, limited releases. And at the time I was very focused purely on limited editions. So the first thing I did was that I started watching and purchasing So the first thing I started doing was that I started purchasing all of these releases that were collector's editions, like steelbooks, digipacks, limited editions and whatnot, because that was sort of like my focus at that point in time. That's all I was looking for. But I also had like this very specific But I would also say that, I was very focused on special features. So I wanted to make sure that I got like all of these releases which had all of the best special features. But I was also hanging out with my friend Stefan, aka Mistefo at the time, and so I had also sort of started to get into the whole idea of packaging design and sort of collecting based on that aspect. And so, I started finding these really elaborate and cool releases for this film. For example, there's like this American release which was released by Pioneer, and it's probably one of the more classic releases for this film on DVD, and it's usually known as the meat pack version, and it's this really just incredibly clever and stylish DVD release which has it comes in and it's just this beautiful presentation. It's basically a single disc DVD. I think it was basically a flip disc, or maybe it was a flip disc in America and a regular DVD in Canada. I can't recall, but anyway, it's a regular DVD single disc release, and it comes presented in this jewel case, like one of these crystal clear see-through cases, and then you essentially have an insert in it. But what's unique about this particular case, which sets it apart from all other cases on the market, I assure you, is that they have taken this embossed printing of a pack of minced meat, like a typical slab of minced meat, and they have taken this very thin layer which is embossed, so all the little creases in the minced meat is embossed, sort of like like just like a brain, where it has like all the little twists and turns and whatnot. All that's embossed, and they've sort of printed this on a piece of glossy cardboard and really sort of stanced and embossed it, so all their little nooks and crannies are embossed, and then they glued this thing onto the front of this jewel case, so it's not see-through on the front anymore, because it has this thin layer of cardboard. It's just a beautiful trick, and it's done so well. It doesn't look cheap at all. And then probably even more so, to complete this wonderful picture, they have taken a see-through plastic case, like clear plastic, sort of like this thin plastic which has sort of been bent to get straight corners and whatnot. So they basically created this plastic slip case to go over the jewel case and go over the minced meat embossing. And on the front of this plastic sleeve they have stuck this actual sticker, which says, just like a typical sticker which you would find on a pack of minced meat, it actually says like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre fresh after 30 years. And it's such a brilliantly designed release, and it's one of those releases which really made me sort of get an interest in packaging design, and sort of in one way made me be that like be one of my dreams, because it is one of these things which I sort of, I don't know if you would say, I don't really have a bucket list, but if I had one, it would definitely be on there to actually design and get to be part of designing a DVD or a VHS or something like that, because it's one of these dream jobs which I have, and still have to this day. It's something I think would be really amazing to work with. Maybe I'm not as much into it today as I once was, but I definitely think it's right up there. If I could just stop doing everything and sort of just decide what I would like to do, I think packaging design for movies would be probably my number one choice, and still is today. But anyway, and interesting story about this particular release, the meat pack. I remember that I reviewed this on YouTube, and this was probably one of the earlier reviews I did for my many Texas Chainsaw editions to come, because it was one of the first ones I picked up. And I remember that there was actually a comment on this review, which was so bizarre, because I actually got a comment from the guy who essentially designed this, like one of the people who was on the creative team that actually came up with this. And I thought that was it's such a bizarre, one in a million chance that this guy is on YouTube and he essentially finds my video and watches this review where I talk all about how cool the packaging is, and he actually comments, and he essentially works doing what I always wanted to do, and he's done it for one of my all-time favorite horror movies. And it was so weird. So yeah, we basically started talking a bit back and forth, and he sort of told me how this was like one of those design things which he did, which sort of became like his one of his all-time favorites when it came to things he was proud of in like his portfolios. Like, yeah, well, if nothing else, then at least I'll always have that with me, that I was the guy in my creative team who sort of came up with this design for the meat pack. Like, that was my brainchild. I actually came up with that. So I thought that was very cool to sort of get a chance to talk a little bit with someone who actually was part of that process. And I mean, since then, I mean, there are so many weird stories from all of these bizarre releases. And I mean, I've purchased things from basically all the ways you can imagine that someone can purchase things. I mean, and that's also one of the more common questions. Like, if it's not a question about how many times I've actually watched this movie, it's usually a question about, like, okay, so how do you find all of these releases? How have you done this? And it's a very weird question, because you can't really answer it just like that. It's like, well, I bought them from all around the world. I mean, it's sort of like people go like, how did you do this? Because it looks quite staggering. Like, if I show someone a picture, of all of these my 200 and plus releases, people are like, this is incredible. And it's sort of hard for someone to look at some of the pictures I post with, where I show all of these releases like in one overview shot. It's sort of hard to take it all in and understand, like, how'd you do this? And I guess there's a short answer and a long answer. I mean, I have been collecting this thing for so long now that one of the good things about that is that I've really become known like the Texas Chainsaw guy. And I was actually at this VHS collectors gathering in Sweden. Here's a little town called Sala, and I made YouTube videos about this as well. And I was actually at this thing the last time I was there, and by this time I've sort of gotten known as being the guy who collects Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I remember you know, usually at these places there's a lot of drinking, sort of like a party kind of atmosphere with movie nerds, and I never drink at this thing because I want to drive back, so I don't want to drink and drive, so I tend to not drink. And I was in the toilet at this bar where it's, you know, they hold it at the same place every year, like this small town bar, and I was in the toilet and I'm taking the piss or whatever, and I'm standing there and washing my hands afterwards, and this guy comes in. So I don't remember who it was, but this guy comes in and he's had quite a few to drink, I imagine, and so he staggers in there. It's like, and he looks at me and he recognizes me, but I'm guessing he doesn't know what my actual name is. He's probably seen me on YouTube or whatever, but he knows me, but it doesn't really know me, so to speak. And it's so funny because I'm standing there washing my hands. This guy comes in and is like, and he recognizes me, and he's like, and he can't find the words and doesn't know who I am. He's like, chainsaw. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. It's like, it's so weird. You sort of get the nickname Chainsaw, and someone's just sort of like, whoa, yelling it at you when you're standing washing your hands at a small, crummy little bathroom at a bar. Okay, so that's a really weird, bizarre instance. But it is interesting. I mean, I love the fact that people have sort of come to associate me with this movie, because that is essentially what has happened. I mean, I have, been so engulfed and so focused on this and bought so many releases, and with the time, people notice you. That's just the thing. Like when I've been on YouTube many years, and I've gotten a lot of positive response from that. I'm not on YouTube as much anymore because basically I don't have the time, and I'm kind of lazy, and it's hard to be creative and keep rolling stuff out. And I don't really care whether I have millions of views or just 500. It's just I'm just happy that people still watch, and I still have some sort of fan base to keep me going. But what I wanted to say is that it has, collecting Texas Chainsaw has sort of given me a name associated with that, and that is very positive in the sense, for one thing, it's nice to be recognized for things. But the other good aspect about this, when you collect a movie to this extreme, to the extremes that I do in this case, people actually, with Facebook and all that, most of the time when I find stuff, it's because people tell me about them. I've sort of become like the chainsaw guy. And so if somebody somewhere among my Facebook friends see something on Facebook, like in VHS collectors groups or whatever, they see something for sale and it's like Texas Chainsaw, there's sort of like this will with people that they will tag me. Like it's almost become like a competition to sort of, some people just want to be like, oh god, you gotta find something that this guy doesn't have, which is just amazing. I just love that. I'm not saying that this happens on a daily basis, but it's become quite common actually, and I've found many releases which I didn't own because someone just tagged me in a post, or someone sent a message saying like, hey, I saw this, do you have this? It's just, so I think that the advances of technology, so to speak, or like the social evolution with Facebook and Instagram and all of these interactive websites has really been positive for me, because all of a sudden it's very easy for people, if they see a Texas Chainsaw release somewhere, or someone finds something, people can text you or send a message or whatever to tell you that, hey, here's one, have you seen this, you got this? And yeah, a lot of the times usually I do actually have it, but if I don't, it's very easy to just, oh no, I don't, thank you for that. And so I find a lot of stuff that way. But I mean, then again, I'm guessing people probably don't ask me that question because they it's not a very good tip saying like, well, I find stuff because people tell me where they are. duh. But I mean, I guess from other collectors asking that question, it's usually a question about, you know, trying to understand how do I actually find all of these very rare and very unusual versions of this film. And if I'm gonna give some sort of pointers to other collectors, and I'm not trying to make myself, you know, be, I don't know, I don't want to come off like I have some sort of god complex or something. But it is actually one of the more common questions. People do actually wonder how I do actually find this. And I mean, I have several friends and collecting friends who also have this bizarre passion for this specific film. And among us, you know, one of the more common questions is obviously, how the hell did you find that one? And so if you want to get some tips for, you know, what you can do to actually find, you know, the things you're looking for, doesn't have to be Texas Chainsaw. I mean, apart from people telling me, you know, getting tips from people, I mean, that's essentially someone else doing the work for you. But if you're gonna do the work yourself, for one thing, there's always eBay. And eBay is a fantastic place to find stuff. I buy so much from eBay, and I've found so many Texas Chainsaw releases from eBay. And one of the best things on eBay is obviously favorite searches. Now, if you don't know how favorite searches actually work, it's basically, you know, you search for something. Say you search for Texas Chainsaw Massacre DVD, and then it comes up with a bunch of results. And whenever you do a search like that, you can click a little button that says save search or favorite search or whatever. And then you will essentially get an email notification whenever someone uploads a new item that matches that search criteria. So that's amazing in terms of technology. I mean, I'm not surprised that the functionality is out there because it's quite common, but it is a very great tool if you want to keep tabs on, you know, certain releases or certain things that you're looking for. So that's one way. I would start by putting up some favorite searches. And I mean, in terms of what I search for myself, I always search for Texas and Massacre. I never search for the word chainsaw in there, because chainsaw can either be spelled as chainsaw, one word, or as chain saw, two words. And that is also, FYI, if you don't know it, the original title on the film is in fact two words, so there's no hyphen in between, it's just a space. So I actually prefer to see the title printed that way, even though I don't know if it's grammatically correct, because usually when you see the word, it's actually printed together as just chainsaw. But yeah, just bit of a fun fact. So I never really searched for that word. I just searched for Texas and Massacre, because that will, you know, whatever you have the spelling of chainsaw, you're gonna get those hits as well if you just search for first and last word. But another trick, if you want to find really unusual versions or find versions from other countries, is to keep favorite searches of alternate titles, like actually have the movie you're looking for but the title in a different language. For example, like in Sweden, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is called Motorsågsmassakern, and in Spain, for example, it's called La Matanza de Texas. I mean, there are a lot of countries, Germany as well, where I don't know, in Germany there's always too much of everything. I think they have like 3 or 4 different titles for it. It's like Blutgericht in Texas. They also have it shown as the Kettensägen Massacre, and I don't know how my German pronunciation is right now. It's not meant to be ridiculing anyone, it's just automatically I'm trying to pronounce it in somewhat the way it's supposed to be pronounced, I guess. So that's one tip you can use. You know, try to check, you can check IMDb, they have alternate titles listed for each movie. If you just go to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre page on IMDb, if you don't know what IMDb is, then I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. But just quick fact, IMDb, imdb.com, that is the Internet Movie Database. And if you have any interest in movies, this would be your number one stop. If you want to know something about a movie, IMDb is the place you go. Don't Google that shit. Just go to imdb.com and search for your film, and there you will have all the info you need for that specific film, be it an indie film or whatever. IMDb lists almost everything, unless it's like something you shot in your basement, which I'm guessing you probably know more about that film than anyone else. But anyway, so searching for alternate titles is always a good thing. And when it comes to searching, I mean, eBay is just one of many tools. You can find stuff on Amazon, Amazon.com or Amazon UK, or whichever Amazon you want to go through actually has, you know, there's a marketplace. When you search for something on the Amazon website, you will also find listings from people who sell stuff secondhand. You know, whenever you find a title, whether it's out of print or current title, there will always be like a listing where you can check used and new, and like, you know, it says from, you know, yada yada, this price or that price. And if you click there, you will actually see listings, like second-hand listings for people who own that title. And I know a lot of this stuff is, you know, everybody knows this. I'm just trying to give you tips in case you are totally new to this game. I don't know who you are or where you are coming from. So that's one thing. And also I want to mention something interesting about Amazon UK, which I found out recently, and I don't know why this is, but it seems like Amazon UK in particular appears to have sort of branched out their search functions or something, because in the old days when you would search for something on Amazon, then you would only get releases from the UK, whereas, you know, if you go to Amazon in Germany, you will only find German releases, and so forth and so forth. But it seems like Amazon UK has now incorporated some feature which makes it that you automatically search globally. So you basically search all the Amazon website, you know, be it America, Japan, Germany, whatever, everything comes up. And this is, you know, also true, or seems to be true, for the marketplace in particular. I mean, if I'm on Amazon Japan, for instance, and I find the Texas Chainsaw Massacre there, and I find some Japanese release which I don't have, then I can click the product page on Amazon Japan, and I can copy like the barcode number on it. And then I take that barcode, and if I go to Amazon UK, search for the barcode, then you would actually get a hit in case anyone in the marketplace sells that release. I'm not entirely sure how this works, because it feels somewhat, you know, sporadic whether you actually find listings or not, and a lot of the time I will find listings that don't actually ship to me, so it doesn't seem like you only find stuff available to you. It seems like you find most stuff. And if you're just going, you know, if you don't want to search for any particular foreign version, you can basically browse them. And if you go to Amazon UK, search for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then you will find, you know, like a typical DVD, and then there's like a link just attached to that where you can click for like other formats. Basically you can check like all the other DVD releases for the same film, and if you do that, you will actually see that there's quite a few listed things for DVDs and, you know, videotapes or whatever that are not from the UK. And I'm not kidding here. I've actually purchased some really bizarre releases through Amazon UK that I didn't have. I have purchased Japanese DVD from there. I have purchased a Turkish DVD, which I didn't really even know existed. It just popped up in my flow when I clicked around, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? I think it's called the Taksanska I don't know, something I can't pronounce anyway. But when it comes to searches, I mean, I'm so devoted to this that, I mean, I go into eBay like every other day and just search for Texas Massacre at random. Even though I have favorite searches and I get pinged, I tend to just search for Texas Massacre Rare or Texas Massacre Edition or Texas Massacre Beta or whatever. You know, I try to come up with different combinations to find stuff, because, you know, it is somewhat hard. A lot of the time you will find that people list things, you know, with typos, or, you know, whenever something pops up and I get a link, or someone sends me a link to something like, oh, did you see this? Did you bid on this? And I'm like, oh, fuck, how did I miss this? And it's like, you know, release which I feel that I didn't get an email on or something. So yeah, you're always trying to sort of refine your searches and, you know, make it work for you. But I mean, I'm so hardcore that I even go to Google and do like Google Images and just search for Texas Massacre there and just click on random images for you know, tapes or stuff that are new to me. Usually I don't find much that way, but I have found stuff that I've actually found through Google, and then essentially clicked my way to whoever uploaded that picture and got in touch with them and bought them if it's something good. So I mean, there's always very weird ways to find stuff. And I mean, speaking of searching, I've even started searching on Instagram, searching for like hashtags for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then I see, you know, you see what people upload, and if people upload from foreign countries and whatnot, ever find a picture that shows something I don't have, I will always, you know, send a personal message or send a comment on that picture to say like, is this for sale, whatever. And it has actually worked on a couple of occasions. I did actually find a guy who was selling stuff through Instagram, which is pretty unusual. He actually had like an Instagram shop where he would post pictures of laser discs that he had for sale, and actually find the Texas Chainsaw Massacre laser disc through him. He just listed them with a picture and saying like, if it's still uploaded, it's still available, and then when he sells them, he takes the pics down. So it's a really clever way if you want to make like a very sort of easy access shop. I mean, it's a bit crude and a bit unsafe, if you will, but I mean, for me, I paid the guy through PayPal, so you have like the PayPal buyer protection to some extent. So I thought that was really cool. I got a really great deal on it, and it was like really good condition. So that was one weird way to purchase something. And if we're gonna go back to the story I had, I'm trying to remember where I was. Like I said, I've been collecting these things for so many years, and I've purchased things in so many ways. And in the beginning, I was all about trying to find collector's editions and limited edition. That were like my first focus. But after a while, it sort of became like, well, I think I've basically found most limited and most special collector's editions there are, and I still wanted more. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe I should try looking at videotapes, or maybe I should try looking at other stuff. So my first step after finding most of the cool quote-unquote releases from around the world on DVD and Blu-ray, I started moving on to Swedish releases, because this was around the time when I found out about the Swedish history of the film, because I didn't actually know this until then. And basically the way this happened was that I was on the Swedish version of eBay, which is called Tradera, but it's basically focused towards Swedish customers, so it's a bit hard to get stuff from there if you're in a foreign country. But anyway, so someone had posted this online auction at Tradera for this very bizarre VHS release for Texas Chainsaw, and it was a VHS presented inside a square case, sort of like a regular VHS clamshell case, like an old VHS clamshell, but the shape of the case was not rectangular at your classic VHS case. It was actually square, and I can't remember exactly what the description read, but it said something about this release being a very old Swedish release by a Swedish company called S01E. And I know S01E. It's a very classic VHS company from the 80s here in Sweden. It was one of the leading VHS distributors at the time, and they actually still exist today, but they have gone on to basically make plastic products like office supplies, like paper trays, or basically they're just a big plastic manufacturer that make plastic products, usually office supplies, but they're still active today, which I think is kind of odd. But back in those days, they were also a video distributor. I think this started from the fact that they made VHS clamshell cases, which were their own branding, like plastic cases. And so this auction said that this was one of the first Texas Chainsaw releases in Sweden, like a very early rental release, and I had never seen this before, so I found this kind of curious. And so I started researching it, and I did this really extensive research, and I was on like video collecting forums here in Sweden, because I could not find a single proof that S01E had released this title. And I found it so weird, because the edition shown in this auction didn't have any kind of copyright info. The only thing I could find on this was that at the top of the front cover, it had this little logo that said IFS. It didn't have any kind of S01E logo on it, and the tape itself was actually blank without labels, which was kind of weird, but then again, I'd never seen this before. So I started looking this up, and I'm not going to bore you with the entire process, but I've started looking at like the history of releases in Sweden, and this sort of spawned from trying to find out about this particular release, which was said to be like the first ever here. And what I found out is that the square-shaped box, or the square-shaped release, this was actually not a release from S01E. Back in the 80s, there were people who had the video rental stores. They wanted to show like the latest in horror films, and so they started importing VHSs from other countries, like from the UK, from Germany, and other countries that had the PAL system. So if there wasn't a movie that was released here on VHS, they tried to get from somewhere else. And this particular square-shaped box, this was actually the very first rental VHS release for the film in the UK. And the reason for the square-sized box, or square-shaped, is that it was actually a dual-function case, which could be used for either VHS or Betamax or 8mm film. Yeah, that's right, the film was actually released on 8mm film as both a feature-length version, which comes on 4 or possibly even 5 reels, or it came on actually on 1 reel as an abridged version, which is really bizarre. It's actually cut down to about 20 minutes. And if you want to see what this looks like, we've uploaded a video a long time ago, me and my friend Stefan, of us doing like a running commentary for this version, which is really bizarre. So I looked this up and I found out that various distributors in Sweden imported this back in the 80s, and they actually rented it out in Swedish rental video stores without no particular, there was no relabeling or anything. They just bought it from the UK and put it on the shelf and rented it out as, here's the latest thing from America. Which is so, you would never do that today. But back then, things were a bit dodgy and yada yada. And it's kind of funny, I was actually... Oh god, this story is getting so complicated. When I was doing this research, my girlfriend actually, she read this magazine called Filter. And anyway, it had this segment on video violence. And in particular, it had this in-depth interview with one of the first people who owned a video rental store in Sweden. And his name was Tommy, and in this article it was very interesting because at the end of the article he mentioned like this whole thing where he had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre being rented out in his store, and like then when the whole video violence craze was about, people would come there and sort of vandalize it. When he came to his store in the morning, there had been like graffiti and people had smashed the windows and whatnot. And he explained that, this circus all started when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre started happening, and he started renting those out. And in the end of the article, he mentions that even though, the movie was banned and, we couldn't rent it out anymore, I always kept the original VHS release that was out for rent, which was the square-shaped box. So my girlfriend reads this magazine article, and she's like, isn't this that version that you were looking for? And I'm like reading the article, and like, geez, it actually says that he still has the tape. This tape version, even here in Sweden, it's very uncommon, but even in the UK, it's a very, very collectible release, which retailed for like several £100 in the UK and several thousand Swedish crowns here in Sweden. But what I was able to find out in my research was also that this release there's only like probably a very few amount of copies that were ever circulated in Sweden. For one thing, the movie was banned, so a lot of them was pulled from shelves, and they're old releases. But I also found out that it wasn't like one single company that distributed this, from what I understand. I'm pretty sure that SLT probably imported them the same way that other companies did, but the only company that I have been able to literally find proof of that they imported this title and distributed it in any kind of organized fashion is a company called Europa Film. And the reason, about why I'm actually able to prove this is because I actually contacted the guy from the magazine article, this guy Tommy, who was still alive at the time, obviously, because they had just made an interview about him, so it goes without saying. But so I actually called him up, and it was such a bizarre thing. So I called him, and he was like, answered like, yeah, this is Tommy. And I'm like, alright, you don't know me, but I just read this article in the Filter magazine. And first of all, just very interesting article, and just loved to read the story. It was really funny and interesting to me because I'm such a big fan of this, and I'm sort of researching the history of this film in Sweden. And I noticed that it says that you still have the VHS rental copy, the original one, and that you've actually had it in your, like, in a desk drawer for all these years and kept it. And I'm like, is this actually true? Do you still have it? And I'm like, I'm almost, you know, my voice is, you know, almost trembling, because this is like finding a holy grail. And he's like, yeah, I have it right here. And it's like going over to like this drawer in like some little cabin at, you know, someplace out in who knows where this guy is living now. And I don't know if he lived in the woods, but yeah, I mean, that's sort of like the feeling, like he's just like this regular guy who once owned a video store, and now, you know, he's kept this in a drawer for all these years, for, you know, for nostalgic reasons, basically. And so he says he still has it, and I'm like, okay, I know this is a weird question, but can I purchase this from you? And he's like, well, you know, it's pretty clear that he's realized, you know, that this is worth quite a bit of money. And so he's like, well, I don't know, you can always make me an offer. And I'm like, geez, I don't know what to say. And I don't really remember what I offered him. I think I made him like a pretty crappy offer to begin with, like 500 crowns or something. And he's like, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't work for me. I mean, I know this is valuable, but quite frankly, I don't think I can ever sell it for, you know, anything upwards, like, you know, 3,000-4,000 or more, because, you know, for him it was such a big part of his history and so much nostalgia connected to it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand. Well, if you ever decide to sell, if you get offers or whatnot, please contact me before you sell it, because I desperately want this, and I wouldn't want to miss out and hear that you sold it to someone else. And he's like, yeah, well, okay, we'll just keep in touch. And as bizarre as it sounds, we actually kept in touch. I actually, you know, I sent him emails, and I actually made him like calls like every year or so, just like, you know, hey Tommy, how you doing? You know, how are things? And he's like this old guy, and he's like, you know, he's talking to me about like what he does and things, and he's like, I mean, he's a great guy, and thought these conversations were fantastic. But it's such a weird situation. I mean, he did this when he was young, and since then, I mean, he's moved on, and I think he did a lot of stuff with horses, like, you know, horse races and things. So he sort of goes on talking about his horse race, and like, I sort of kept in touch. Like every now and then I would send him an email or give him a call, like checking in, like, how is everything, are you still alive, and so on. And then one day I actually get an email from him. He contacted me this time, and he basically said, like, you know, we've been talking a lot, and I've actually decided that I'm ready to sell this. And he was always very clear about the fact, you know, that, you know, I'm not selling this because I need money in any sense. And he said that right from the start when I started making offers, like, you know, it doesn't matter if you offer me a lot of money for this, because I can't really get rid of it because of nostalgia, and it's such a big part of who I was and what happened back in those days, which I fully understand. I mean, if I had the history that he has, being, you know, a person who had a video rental stores in the 80s and this whole craze with what happened, I probably wouldn't sell this either. I would have also kept it in a drawer all these years. But he actually changed his mind, and he called me up and he told me, like, okay, I'm ready to sell this. I think he wanted 5,100 Swedish crowns for it, which, I mean, you can just go to some sort of currency converter, and pretty soon you're gonna realize that's a pretty steep price, considering that this is a VHS. Now, I'm not saying that I overpaid. I mean, I think I overpaid a little, but it's still, I mean, you usually have to pay like 3,000 or 4,000 at least for this release. It is actually that uncommon. And the reason for why I went so high on this particular copy is because, unlike most versions, unlike all the versions rented out in the UK, which actually come with blank tapes, I mean, in the sense that they don't have labels on it, that's actually the way it was distributed from IFS. Oh, I forgot to mention, by the way, IFS stands for Ivor Film Services, and this was the distributor in the UK, but there's very little info on the actual box to confirm this. It just says IFS, which is why it was really hard to figure out what it was. But anyway, unlike all of the UK copies, this particular copy that he had was actually relabeled on the tape. It actually had a sticker on the tape from Europa Film, and this is the only one of the few copies that I've seen that has this. I've never seen another one in the flesh that has a sticker like this. And so this was very cool to me because it sort of proved and connected to the Swedish history of the film. And I know that, you know, it would be a super special and unique version which would differ from everyone else's. Even if you had the UK version, this would be a different one with a different history to it, which was very, very important and interesting in my opinion, because I am all about the history of this film and the Swedish history in particular. And so I actually purchased it from him for 5,100 Swedish crowns, which is insane. And I can't remember if I told my girlfriend at the time. I just said like, okay, I bought it. And she's like, okay, how much did you pay? I don't think she even asked me. I mean, she lets me spend my money on whatever I want to do. We have separate economies, so that works. I get to spend money on whatever I want to spend on, and she spends money on whatever she spends money on. Be it chickens or buying cheap or, not cheap, buying sheep like the animal sheep, whatever. Anyway, I bought it. And what's also cool about this is that, seeing as he had worked at the rental store, as he was a rental store owner, he actually knew a bit more about this. And he knew that they actually had a distributing agreement with Europa Film. And so this was the first I ever heard about this. And he's like, yeah, it still has the label on it. And he sent me pictures, and I'm like, well, this is very weird. I've never heard of Europa Film having anything to do with this. And the reason why that is probably because, when this film got such a bad reputation during the video violence scandal, so to speak, then nobody really wanted to be associated with it. So like SLT and all these companies which had distributed it on the Swedish market through these really somewhat dodgy channels by importing it and whatnot, nobody really wanted anything to do with it. I mean, I'm guessing that's why there aren't many copies with stickers on them, but he still had one with a sticker. And he also actually had an original rental agreement sent out from Europa Film to his video store, and it actually clearly states, like, here are the current titles that you have on loan from Europa Film or something, and it actually lists 2 copies of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, yada yada yada, and other movies, blah 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 blah. So that actually proves that there are at least 2 copies that were distributed by Europa Film to, video rental stores. And this was back in the 80s, so video rental stores was very new, and this was one of the first ones, like I mentioned, according to the article in Filter at least. It's actually funny because when I was at the Video Gatherers Collectors convention in Sala that I mentioned before with the guy in the bathroom, there was, I don't think this was the same year, I think this was the year prior somewhat, I was actually approached by another guy who I didn't know, who came up to me and was like, "You're the guy who collects Texas Chainsaw?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, the square box that you have from Europa Film?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, like, I saw you post something on the internet about this rental agreement. And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I'm the guy who has the other copy." Like, it's just such an amazing world, like, meeting collectors and learning things. And I mean, this whole story with, like, my obsession with this movie, it has led me down so many bizarre ways and gotten me in touch with so many fantastic and interesting people who share this fascination for this film. I guess it's a bit of a dream for me too. At some point I would love to actually make a self-made documentary where I actually talk and meet a lot of these people who I've gotten in touch with. I think it would be really cool to make a documentary about my fascination about this. And I guess this podcast episode is sort of a bit of a test to see if I have the material needed to make any kind of documentary. But it's still just an idea and a dream, but it would be cool to do. I would love to do, like, interviews with, like, Swedish, maybe not celebrities, but, people in Sweden who are in the business, so to speak. I would love to make an interview with, like, Anders Darve, who released it back in 86 when it got banned, and he, handed himself over to the police. And I've also talked to other people in the media. I've been in pretty close contact with a guy named C.O. Olsson, who was once the head of, I don't know if it was the head of, but he did work at Atlantic Film at some point, who distributed the movie on VHS very early on. And that was really cool because one of the first VHS release in Sweden, which came out, which was the heavily censored version, this has like a very classic cover on it where it says, instead of like the classic tagline in America, who will survive and what will be left of them, this one has like the same typical poster art with like the white poster and like the title, but instead of having who will survive and so on, the Swedish poster says, just black on white, the most hated film in Swedish history. And I always thought that tagline was so, I don't know, it's such a funny tagline and such a Swedish thing, because it's goes so hand in hand with like the history of this film in Sweden. And it was funny because I was talking to this guy CEO, or it's always weird when you're trying to say, you know, you're doing a podcast in English and someone, you know, you have a Swedish name in there and you're going like, well, you know, like Anders or CEO or Peter or Patrick, you know, you're always trying to sort of Americanize the names. And then whenever you have a name that's, you know, not a typical American name, it always sounds so ridiculously stupid. But anyway, talking to CEO, I'm trying to say it in Swedish now, otherwise it's CEO, which is very weird. Fuck it. So I was talking to him because he is actually one of the managers or one of the CEOs or the head of this company called Studio S. There's actually this distribution company now, and this is a modern day DVD company, or like a newer era company. I mean, they've been around for a while, but they are a very sort of modern company, which has always been very focused on releasing horror movies and sort of smaller, unusual, maybe not like, you know, your typical blockbuster movie, but rather these extreme and special, unique films in the horror subgenres and whatnot. And so I basically got in touch with them because they were doing a new release of the movie for like the 40th anniversary edition, which was just like a couple of years ago. And, you know, he had heard from me because, you know, I liked the movie and whatnot. You know, I don't know if I had been talking to them because I knew that CEO had also worked at Atlantic Film at some point or whatever. And it was sort of funny because he actually told me something when we were chatting on Facebook. Like, you know, I mentioned the title on the old Swedish VHS, like the most hated film in Swedish history. I always found that so weird. And he's like, you know, I'm the guy who actually came up with that. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, I was working back at Atlantic Film and I was doing the design for that release. And I was sitting around working, you know, trying to work my head around like, what can I put on the cover to make it, you know, sort of pop and stand out? And then all of a sudden he was like, there it is, the most hated film in Swedish history. And I'd never heard about the fact that he was the guy who coined that phrase, that he did the cover art on that. So I was like, what are you talking about? That is like the coolest cover I've ever seen. I love that quote. So that was really funny. It's amazing how you sort of, you know, things like this sort of get you in touch with people whom you had no idea were involved in any sense with the movie. Oh, and this is also like, I mean, we live out on the countryside now, and my girlfriend, who's, you know, she does like sheep herding and stuff. We have 2 dogs, and she's into, you know, she trains with like sheep and actually does herding and stuff, which is pretty cool. And she has met this like neighbor or guy who lives like in our area. We live in the woods, but it's a very sort of, when in the summertime when you go to like your summer house or whatever, this is like that sort of typical community where it's mostly summer houses. So there doesn't really live too many people here that live here all around the year. I mean, we do, but usually people don't. But anyway, we met these neighbors. Basically, my girlfriend met them because they wanted to have sheep. They had like a farm and they wanted sheep, and she had sheep or knew how to get sheep. So they sort of, you know, they got together and yada yada yada, it worked out. And so we started hanging out with these neighbors. It's like people we would probably never have hung out with otherwise. You know, they're a bit above our generation, you know, we're not the same age. They're great people, so I mean, we love hanging with them, you know, have dinner or, you know, just have coffee and, you know, eat some cake or whatever you do when you hang out. And so one one day when they were over here, I realized I've never really shown or talked to them about my movie collection. And so we're going into my movie room, and I'm like, well, you know, I collect movies, and they're like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then all of a sudden, the guy, his name is Mats, he's much older than I am, and he's like, oh, look, and he's like, that's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I'm like, yeah. And he's looking at this square-shaped box, the one I mentioned earlier. You know, oh, what is this? And I'm like, oh, this is one of the earliest Swedish quote-unquote versions that was released. It was actually imported from the UK, and I start talking about the whole thing. And he's like, well, I know this. And I'm like opening up the box, and I'm talking about it, and I'm showing him the Europa film sticker, and he's like, that's my sticker. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then turns out that this guy, our neighbor, who we completely met at random, he actually worked at Europa Film, and he was actually one of the guys who was putting the stickers on the tapes. And it's like, there are so many bizarre coincidences where you meet people like that, and it turns out he actually knew other people who I've been talking to in the business, like people from the old days. So it's so crazy. Like I was mentioning before about CO, one day he contacted me out of the blue. And this is a completely unrelated story, but anyway. He contacted me out of the blue because he, you know, from our long talks and whatnot, he knew that I was a collector and that I love anything about Texas Chainsaw. And he said, like, you know, we're doing this 40th anniversary edition, and I was wondering if you'd like to get a sneak peek at, like, the new cover art. So, you know, I have this page on Facebook where I only talk about Texas Chainsaw, and I post pics of my collection and yada yada. And he knew about this, so he said, like, maybe you can show this on your Facebook page, like, you know, like sort of like an exclusive news flash about the release we're putting out. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that would be awesome. And Studio S, who is the company distributing this, they've actually also want to make this clear just to avoid confusion. They're called Studio S Entertainment. They've actually borrowed their title from the old Studio S broadcast. So it's not a coincidence, it's bluntly stolen from that TV program. So just sort of fun fact. But anyway, so he's like, yeah, okay, so he's sending me some pictures for this new cover art that they're doing. And I love the cover art, it's very nice. But one thing that strikes me directly about this, when I first see this cover, I'm like, okay, this is a really cool cover, and this is also interesting because it's a different, sort of like an exclusive, unique cover, which wasn't just rehashing all of the, you know, classic imagery. You know, it's one of these, another sort of Achilles heel about this movie, is that, you know, whenever it gets a re-release, for a very long time, it's always been like the same pictures. You know, you always have Leatherface like running with the saw, or you have a close-up of Pam hanging on the meat hook, or, you know, there's always like this 1, 2, 3 key screen grabs, which, you know, gets rehashed over and over and over again, which is a shame. But then again, if you have a movie which gets re-released so many times as this does, you know, you're gonna get some duplicates of cover art. You know, it's just stuff that you're gonna have to live with. But so they had an exclusive artwork, which they were doing brand new, which was, you know, different from all the others that had been released up until that point. And so I'm thinking, this is great. But on this cover art, they basically just have the title in yellow letters on a red background, and then just in the foreground, they have a chainsaw sitting on the floor with blood on the blade and whatnot. And I just love this cover art. It really pops out. But I can't, you know, part of me wants to be a part of this, and part of me wants to just say, like, you know, praise them and be like, oh, this is so cool, can I get free copies, please? But at the same time, there is something that hits me very early on. As soon as I look at this, I love it, but I'm also like, well, you know, that chainsaw isn't actually the correct brand of chainsaw. It's such a stupid thing to comment on, in sense, but I mean, I'm a collector and I see these things, and I know that as a collector, I mean, if you're gonna get a 40th anniversary edition of something, and they do this great job of coming up with a new exclusive cover art, which they put a lot of work into, I can see, and then, you know, for some reason they don't use a picture of the correct chainsaw. I mean, the movie is very much about imagery, and the chainsaw is a very specific model which in itself has a very sort of specific history. And the chainsaw in the film, by the way, it's a Poulan 245A, and this is one of these things which sort of annoys me because it's so difficult to get your head around. It's very oftenly confused by the Poulan 306A, which has basically the identical saw, but the 306A has a smaller gas tank, which, if you don't look closely, you might not notice it, but it is a very noticeable thing if you know what to look for and if you actually compare it, like screen to screen comparison. And so the original, saw is a Poulan with the bigger gas tank. But I heard that someone mentioned that in the Gunnar Hansen biography, rest in peace, which came out a couple years back, which is called Chainsaw Confidential, someone mentioned to me that in this book Gunnar Hansen actually says that the saw used in the film was a Poulan 306A, which had the fuel tank switched for a 245A fuel tank. That's just ridiculous. Why would they switch the the fuel tank is the only thing that differs between the saws. So why the fuck would you take a 306A and switch the fuel tank? I haven't read that part myself, but that's something somebody told me. I forget who it was. But in any regards, I just consider that, to me, the original saw was a 245A. That's the way I look at it. If we want to get or make a screen-accurate replica, you would do wisely to pick up a 245A Poulan chainsaw. And as I understand, there are many, there have been several versions of this saw, and the saw in the film has always been portrayed as being a yellow saw. And there's also they put some black tape over the Poulan logo and yada yada. But it's always been yellow, which always felt a bit weird to me because whenever you look for this particular saw model, it's always like this neon greenish color. So I'm thinking maybe they repainted it to be yellow because they couldn't use the Poulan brand or something, which is also why they sort of put a tape over the logo. I can understand it. What chainsaw company would want to be associated with a chainsaw wielding maniac who cuts people up? I'm guessing it's a bit of a sensitive issue. One of the things which I found in my research is that I'm pretty sure that back in the early 70s there was actually a yellow saw released. And up until recently I figured okay, so that's the version they used. But when they released the 40th anniversary edition, there was a couple of deleted scenes on there, which shows behind the scenes stuff of Leatherface, in some of the final scenes where he's running around with the saw, and you see it a bit more up close. And when I look at the raw footage of this, I realize that the saw he's actually running with looks like it could actually be light green. It's filmed on a very sort of warm color print or whatever, or a different type of film. So I'm thinking maybe the fact that the saw looks like it's yellow throughout the movie, it might actually just be a color correction thing, and something that comes with the movie format that they used. And I could be wrong, but when I was looking at these extra deleted scenes, which I pretty sure are on most of the 40th anniversary releases, it definitely looks green. I could be wrong, and you feel free to dispute me on this. I'm not saying that this is absolute truth or anything, but if you wanna look into it, I would check out those deleted scenes, because to me it might actually seem like it's green. But but most people consider it as being yellow, so yada yada. Back to the saw and back to the conversation with the CEO. So I'm chatting with him and he shows me these pictures, and I'm like, I love the cover, but can't you please, just tell me, for the love of God, that you're gonna do back and you're gonna change the saw to the correct saw. I know it's a small thing and might not be too important to you, but just listen to me. As a collector, this is a very important detail. Anyone who wants to get a 40th anniversary of this movie, and anyone who's passionate about it, is gonna know, just looking at it, okay, that saw isn't even the right saw. Did they just pick a generic saw because it's called chainsaw? It's quite a letdown for the true enthusiast. And I mean, he did sort of listen to this, and he's like, well, we're a small distributor, and we worked really hard on this, and so, and I'm like, yeah, I understand that, but it's like, it's not hard. You can if you just change the saw, it's an amazing cover, and I know that it would mean so much to so many people. And one of the interesting aspects is also that, I don't know, for whatever reason, but whenever you have this movie, you always see this with like, usually when you see a cover for this film, it's a screen grab from the movie. So obviously there you're gonna have the right saw. But whenever they do artwork or partial artwork which shows a chainsaw, it's like 9 times out of 10, it's just a generic saw. They never show the actual Poulan 245A chainsaw. And I mean, I have no idea why this is, but yeah, it's definitely a fact. Just go look at the saws that are shown. Like, look at the Laserdisc from America. Like, you fold it out and it's like this big shot of a beautiful chainsaw. And it's not in the movie. I mean, it's weird. I don't know why this detail has been so overlooked, and maybe it's partly because the saw isn't featured too prominently in any kind of detail. I mean, usually Leatherface is holding it and running around, or it's in motion. It's not too commonly that you see it close up and sort of studied in that sense. But anyways, so he says something like, well, I think it's nice of you to say, and it's like, I wouldn't mind changing it, but we're very late in the process, and we're sending this to like printing just like the day after tomorrow. So we really don't have time to change it because the process is too far gone. And I'm like, no, come on, it's just change it. And he's like, I don't know, sorry man, I can't do it. We don't have time, we worked too long on this cover, and it's like, it just doesn't work. We can't get it done. And I'm like, well, what if I find you a picture of the saw? And he's like, I don't know, man. It's gonna be too close of a call. I mean, it would have to be like from the right angle if we're gonna work it into the cover now. It's too many layers and Photoshop and yada yada. And I'm like, okay, well, what if I get you a picture of the correct saw at the right angle? Would you be able to change it? And he's like, and I even though we're just talking on chat, I can sort of see the frustration in his voice, sort of think like, okay, sort of against his will. It feels like he's sort of like, yeah, okay, well, if you can get me the right saw at the right angle and you can get it to me like by tomorrow, okay, then maybe we can change it. But I won't promise anything, but I'll give it a shot. And I'm like, don't worry, I'm on it, I'm gonna call everyone. And it's like, alright, so we stop chatting, and this is like, I think it's in the evening, it's sort of late at night. So I'm going out on Facebook, and I'm going through all like the Facebook groups that I know that has any sort of interest in Texas Chainsaw, trying to like pull every string I can to find someone who has like a replica of the chainsaw. So I'm like talking to people in like collectors forums and on Facebook groups, and anyone who's a fan of Texas Chainsaw. I'm like sending messages like all my collector friends, and like, do you know anyone who has a chainsaw replica? I really need to find someone who has the Poulan 245A chainsaw. So if someone mentions the name of someone, like, you should talk to this guy Connor. I'm like, okay, who is that? I don't have him on my Facebook, like on my friends list. And it's like, yeah, you should talk to Connor DeLess. He's an American. He has several of these saws. And I'm like, okay, so I add him on my friends list, and I start chatting to him. And I'm in Sweden and he's in America, so it's like a 6-hour time difference. So I'm chatting to him, and I'm like, hey man, I know this is far-fetched, but I sort of do the whole story saying like, they're doing this cover art that I want to change and yada yada yada. And like, can you get me a picture of the chainsaw? And he's like, yeah, well, you came to the right guy. I got like this screen accurate replica. It's like the right model from the early 70s, which is actually yellow, which is a very rare color for the saw. And he's also the guy who sort of told me about the whole thing with the colors and whatnot. And he's like, so I'm not home, but I'll be home in a couple of hours or whatever, and I can get some pics to you then. And I'm like, okay, well, gonna be close. I mean, it's already like evening here. And he's like, well, yeah, don't worry, I'll be home in a couple of hours. And I'm like, yeah, it's still gonna be cool. It's gonna be a little late, but it's gonna be okay. So a couple of hours goes by and he still hasn't gotten back to me. And I think we're closing in on like, I don't know, it's like 8 o'clock or something in the evening. I mean, I'm still up, but I mean, I need to get them these pics till the day after. I basically need to send them on this very night, so to speak. So I'm like, oh, come on. Another hour goes by or whatever, and he comes back online. It's like, sorry, I got delayed. And I was like, can you help me? And it's like, yeah. So he's gonna go get his camera. And I think we're very late now. I think we're closing in on it. It's like it's 10 o'clock or something at night. And my girlfriend, I mean, I'm a bit of a night hawk. I mean, I'm always, up late. And, if it was up to me, I usually stay up until midnight at least before I go to bed. I like to be up late and I sleep in the morning. I'm night guy, as they say in Seinfeld. I don't care about day guy, getting up early and being tired, that's morning guy's problem, I don't care, I'm night guy. I sleep as late as I want. But my girlfriend, she's more like going to bed at like, I don't know, 9 or something, depending on which, 9, 10. And so we're sort of closing in on that time now, and she's like, I want to go to bed. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just working on this, and we're almost there. So I start getting like photos sent to me from Connor, and he's like, I got the saw on the table and I'm photographing it, and I'm like checking, and I'm like, yeah, well, you're not really photographing at the right angle. And he's like, yeah, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I got these pics. And I start sending him these pics of the saw with like the temporary cover art that they're doing. Like, you need to get the saw much more at an angle like this. And he's like, okay, well, we can check. And so we're going back and forth. And I'm like, trying to get these pics from him. But at the same time, my girlfriend is like, I want to go to bed. Can we go to bed? So yeah, okay, we'll go to bed. This should be done in a few minutes. So we go to the bedroom, and she usually wants to read a book or something. So she's sort of in bed reading her book and whatnot while I'm chatting away on my iPhone, sending pics back and forth to America to sort of get him to align the saw correctly. And at something, I think his camera sort of stopped working or something, and I'm like, come on, we just need to fix this. And then after a while, girlfriend's like, well, I'm going to bed. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just give me a couple of minutes. I'm just gonna work this out. She's like, turning out the light on her side of the bed, and I'm like, turning out the light on mine, but I still have my phone on, sort of chatting on Facebook, and it's like, complete darkness, and it's just my light is on. I'm like, you okay? I'm like, yeah, I want to go to sleep now, but yeah, you can finish up. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll be done soon. And I was sitting there, and this process just keeps going on and on and on. And finally, I put the phone down, and I keep it on my bedside table, and I take my glasses off, and I think like, yeah, this is it, I'm going to bed now. But then my phone starts buzzing. I mean, I have it on mute, obviously, but I see that light sort of pings it, and it sort of, I mean, the lights on the iPhones are real bright, so it sort of, shines up the whole part of my side of the room, so to speak, and I'm like, okay, I gotta check what this is. So I reach for the phone again, and my girlfriend is like, for fuck's sake, if you're gonna stay up, just go up, stop fucking fiddling with your phone, and I'm trying to go to sleep. But I'm like, okay, it's just, I mean, my girlfriend, I love her, but yeah, she will get quite a temper if she's, doesn't get her sleep. So I very quickly remove myself from the bedroom with my phone, go back downstairs. When I get back downstairs, I realized that I don't have my glasses with me. And you might think from my YouTube videos that I just wear these, I don't know, hipster, but big size glasses, whatever. You might think that I just wear them because I want to get an interesting look. And yeah, that is true, but I do actually have a problem with my sight. So it's not like I just wear them, for show. I actually had to get glasses, and they are actually specific for me, so I do actually need them. I don't know why I'm bringing this up. So I don't have my glasses. They are still sitting on my bedside table, and it's not like I'm blind without my glasses. I mean, I can still see. It's sort of like a cheap way to get drunk. You take up your glasses, and it's a bit blurry. You sort of have to squint a bit, but if I do it for any long amount of time, it will sort of, my eyes will easily sort of start to burn and sort of itch and stuff. So I'm back down at the bottom floor. My girlfriend is quite pissed. So I'm like, fuck. One of those moments where you're sort of like, should I go back upstairs and get my glasses, or no? I'm not going back up there to just fetch my glasses. So it's like closing in on midnight. My eyes are like running, you know, really tired, and you know, not having glasses is definitely not helping. It's like I'm itching like crazy, and I'm chatting with Connor, and he's like sending pics back and forth, and finally I sort of get a pic which is somewhat close to the proper angle, and I'm like, all right, let's just use this. I can't recall if I'm actually chatting with CO at the same time, but I think I am. I think we have sort of a communication at the same time around midnight the day before, and you know, I know that, you know, they have to get these pics on this day. I can't wait another day and send them tomorrow because it's gonna be too close to a call. So I'm like, okay, I got the pics, and I send him these photos that Connor has taken of his saw, and it's like, all right, what's good job, let's see if we can't work this in. I'm gonna send these over directly to like our art department, and they're gonna look at it and see if they can sort of work this into it, and we'll see what we can do. And I'm so fucking exhausted, and my eyes are burning, and I'm like, alright, great. Could fall asleep on the spot there at the computer. So I finally get to turn my phone off. I go upstairs, crawl into bed, fall asleep. And I get back to him, and we talk the next morning. And they actually did it. They actually changed the cover, and actually got to change the saw based on these photos that Connor took, and me sort of being like the middleman. It's such an awesome little story to me, because this is a film which I love, and it's been a very important dream and a very big thing for me, that I've always wanted to work with packaging design. And now I actually have, you know, this story that actually connects me in some way, creating the cover art for the 40th anniversary release for my all-time favorite horror film here in Sweden, which is just an amazing. I mean, I know I physically didn't sit down to do the job, but this whole knowledge of the fact that I actually got them to change it with, you know, actually hard work, to be honest. And they were actually really nice about it. They actually sent us free copies of the movie, but they also actually sent us this limited edition mini poster printed only for promotional purposes, which has the same artwork on it. Oh yeah, and finally both me and Connor actually got our names in the credits on like the back cover of the DVD and Blu-ray. If you look closely, it actually says down at the bottom of the page, it's printed in Swedish, but it basically says like, special thanks to Connor Deleuze and Oscar Falk for the help with the cover, which is just, I just thought it was amazing. Such a ridiculously cool little thing for me to have been a part of. It's so fantastic how you get to meet people in this way. I've been in touch with a lot of different collectors who also love Texas Chainsaw, and these are people that are becoming closer and closer to like very important friends. In all honesty, this is a very big part of my life, and it's one of those things which occupies like my free time. I have this dream of leaving behind some kind of legacy, which sort of stems from me starting out my website back in the day, discjunkietv, which was meant to be like a database of limited editions and various releases which I accumulated. I've been really lazy with updating that website for many years now, but recently I have sort of gotten this idea that I would like to convert it in part to a database specifically made for Texas Chainsaw and the Texas Chainsaw collection and the releases that I own. So I actually started up an Instagram account which you can check out, which is called TCMDB for Texas Chainsaw Massacre Database, sort of like IMDb, but instead it's TCMDB. And I basically just post pictures of all of these different releases that I have, and I also tag them with like different hashtags, so you can basically check for like hashtag patterns. Like if you want to find all of my American releases, you can check the tag called TCMDB America, and if you want to check all the UK versions, you can go to TCMDB United Kingdom. So, you know, Instagram works very well for this little database project, but I would like to expand on it and actually have it be a bigger part of discjunkie.se, because that page is already very detailed and has like a database system with like special features and listings and much more of a in-depth review type website to it. But that's still in the future, but it is sort of a part of an idea and part of a legacy which I would like to be, you know, leave behind in some way. It sounds so corny when I say it, but the videos I make and this podcast as well, it's always been about sort of, you know, telling stories and sort of leaving something behind for, you know, future generations. I think that's part of why we all sort of do, you know, podcasts or websites or these things we leave behind where, you know, whether it's question about showing photos and getting likes on Facebook. I mean, we do this because we want some kind of recognition. You want to leave something behind. I mean, everybody likes to, you know, do something that goes viral and people like it, and I have this passion for Texas Chainsaw and I would like to make it, you know, be useful to someone. I think that people collect for many different reasons, but for me it's to a large extent my Texas Chainsaw obsession has always been about sort of creating some sort of visual database. You can check Instagram for now, or you can check my Facebook page, which is also called TCMDB. Because, I mean, that's just the thing. I mean, there are so many different versions and different formats of this thing. And, I mean, we can just go through them. I have an 8mm release on 8mm film. I have numerous releases on VHS, on Betamax. I have releases on Laserdisc. I have a CED video disc. I have a Japanese VHD, which is one of those formats which didn't really take off anywhere else. I have a Video 2000, which is one of those formats which also didn't go too well. It was one of those alternatives to VHS and Betamax. I guess you could say I have a audio cassette version as well. It's actually a soundtrack release. It's a bootleg soundtrack release. But the thing is that when they made this film, like the whole weird soundtrack or scoring, which I talked about before, they basically destroyed all of the master tapes for that. So the only way you can actually hear the soundtrack is to actually hear it through the film with all of the audio dialogue and stuff intact. So someone actually made a straight audio dub of the entire film and put it on audio cassette. And so that's also an interesting fact, is that, you know, there is no official soundtrack release for the film because they could never isolate these quote-unquote soundtrack or score. It's kind of interesting because, you know, there are not a lot of actual, like, regular music in the movie. There are a few tracks which are actually audible, one of which is a track called Fool for a Blonde, which is released by this guy called Roger Bartlett. I think his band was called Roger Bartlett and Friends. It's actually a really hard audio track to find, but apart from that, there's really, I can't really remember. I think there's one, maybe two more tracks, but it's usually just like audio tracks that are featured on the radio, or like there's never like a track playing in the background or something to sort of set the mood. It's always sort of part of the scene or whatever. So I was talking about formats, and oh yeah, I have one more format which I'm pretty sure I'm probably the only guy in the world. There might be someone else, but I think this one is pretty much all mine, and I'll explain why. A while back, I was in one of these Facebook groups, and there was this guy there. I think it's called Vini. I'm not gonna go into the last name, but he was actually the head of Elite Entertainment company in the US, and it's the company that put out one of the like collector's edition laser discs for this film. And so he was in one of these Facebook like horror collector Facebook groups for videotapes and whatnot. I think it was actually in Laserdisc group. And so apparently he was going through like his basement or attic or their warehouse, whatever, and he was basically selling all of these old master tapes. And he posted these pics of these old master tapes for Texas Chainsaw, and like the raw footage and like the raw master tapes that they used when they were producing the Elite Entertainment Laserdisc. And I was like, these are insane, and they are also obviously one of a kind, because that's just the thing about master tapes. They are called master tapes for a reason, because there's only one of them. And so I'm not gonna tell you how much I paid, because I mean it was quite a lot, I'll just say that. But I actually was able to purchase from him, I think they are 6 tapes in total. There's like 3 Betacam master tapes, or maybe it's like 2, I think it was 2 tapes which are for the film, like the feature-length film. Then there are 3 master tapes which are for all of the special features. And then there was like one more tape, which was like a smaller tape. I forget if it's Betacam or if it's something else. But this was like some sort of high definition test footage. Because, you know, this was before DVD and Blu-ray came out. I mean, this was Laserdisc release. They shot everything on these really high definition industry type cassettes. I mean, these master tapes are gigantic. They are roughly, you can Google like Betacam master tapes or something. They're roughly twice the size of your regular VHS tapes, so they're absolutely huge. And I can't play them. I mean, I don't have a Betacam player, but I still think they are amazing. And they don't have artwork or anything. It's just like these archival copies with these old labels that say Texas Chainsaw on them and Elite Entertainment. You know, you can't put a price tag on them. It's such a interesting artifact from a time long gone. But yeah, I think we're basically getting to the end of this. I'm really tired, and I'm not really sure what other kind of story I'm supposed to pull out of my ass right now. Guess it's just about time to listen to that weird ukulele track once again. And that's it. That was my story of addiction today. Ooh. Okay, so that was the end of episode 2, and maybe I should have divided it into like episode 2, 3, 4 and 5 based on how incredibly long it became this time. I'm uploading this to YouTube. I also uploaded the first episode to YouTube recently, where, you know, it's never been available on YouTube before, so hopefully my followers will enjoy this format more, and I'm hoping I'll get more feedback this way. So let me know what you think in comments, or send me an email, or, you know, depending on where you actually listen to this. And I also want to mention, you know, I have several ideas for upcoming stories that I would like to do, but I would still love to get some feedback on things that you would like to hear me talk about. You know, it doesn't have to be a particular edition. It can be basically anything surrounding movies or surrounding, you know, me, myself, my life, whatever, because, you know, I do try to work other stuff in, even if it's mainly a podcast about movie collecting. You know, I try to bring up other things that I think are interesting to talk about. So yeah, just let me know if there's anything particular you'd like me to bring up, or, you know, any other kind of feedback. If you know, want to say something that you think could be improved or changed or whatever. You don't have to mention how long the podcast is, because I'm well aware of it. Thank you very much for listening to this second episode. I'm amazed you got it this far. And yeah, you should probably go out and get some sunlight now, in case you've been sitting inside, because it's fucking 2 hours. So yeah, take care, and hopefully, you know, you'll listen in and come back for the next episode.